All right. Welcome, everybody, to Finance Essentials with Danny Hudson. I am your magnificent host, Danny Hudson, and we are joining you here on another beautiful day. Right? I hope everyone's day is going pretty well so far. We've got a great show for you today. Let me first start off by saying thank you, everybody, for listening. I really appreciate it, especially the folks who not only provide me feedback but also share the show, comment the show, have subscribed, those kinds of things, because those things are critical as far as being able to help the show grow. But again, if this is your first time listening, I hope you stick around, listen to some more episodes. Today's show is actually going to be somewhat of a callback to a show that I had done several months ago when we were talking about retail business closures that were anticipated as far as lockdown impacts and kinds of things. But we'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, so today's great. I'm really glad that you guys are here hanging out and listening to the show. We got some great things going on. Coinbase went public today. Last I saw, they were up, but then they came back down, which is interesting because, as we talked about some other IPOs in the past, Coinbase, who actually has significant revenue, is kind of struggling as far as being able to stay up kind of where they were expected to go. Yet other companies such as Airbnb, who would have a market value basically more than all of the hotel chains that actually owned hotels, was worth. So it's interesting to see the dynamic where a company that has all of this revenue, they end up kind of going down a little bit, but then you have other companies where they're like, we don't actually own anything, but we want to be valued at $80 billion kind of thing. But that is there. Bitcoin recently hit a new all-time high. Ethereum all-time high. A lot of altcoins also flirting around with that level. So it's a great time to be in the crypto space. Obviously, I'm going to leave that to other shows because those guys are going to know that kind of thing way more than me. But let's see some other good news that's going on. Vaccine rollouts as far as COVID is going on have been pretty significant. So if you're wanting a vaccine, I'm not going down that route, but if you would like to get one, if it's going to help you feel better about being able to go out and venture into public, obviously I encourage you, to get one. But you know what? Hey, if you don't want one, that's all right too. I know we talked a little bit a few weeks ago as far as the expenditures. My guess is that you're probably going to start to see information as far as booster shots, right? Or probably variant shots that they're going to probably start kind of calling them, that you're going to have to go and get your annual COVID booster shot. And, so if you think it's going to be helpful and it's going to help you be a little less fearful about going out in public and interacting with people and seeing your grandparents or your grandkids, then hey, go for it. But anyway, so on to today's show. What I wanted to do, like I had mentioned to you earlier, is I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the 2021 retail landscape. One of the earliest shows that I did was talking about the lockdown impacts on businesses, right? The need for businesses to have to pivot to essentially forced market conditions, right? You're a J.C. Penney's, you employ 200 people, 300 people, however many people might work there. Government comes along and says, well, you're not allowed to operate anymore. So what do, right? You have to try to pivot as best you can, considering the market conditions that are available to you. So now that we've got several months, I guess at this point, it's probably about 6 months worth of shows and worth of data, worth of forecasts, that kind of thing. So I wanted to revisit that world, right? What is the landscape currently looking like? Did the expectations of what people were expecting a year ago kind of come to fruition, or has things changed a little bit? So I found an article on CNBC, and it was talking about a UBS study. The UBS study was predicting that 80,000 additional retail outlets were going to close by 2026. So basically 80,000 over the next 5 years. So that comes out to be what, about 17,000 retail outlets a year that they are still anticipating to close due to these market conditions, whether it's because they're just too big. Again, we use pennies as an example, which I feel kind of bad using pennies as an example because they've really been beat up for the last 5 or 10 years or however long they've really been struggling financially. But that would be an example. And so to provide a little bit of context, there were about 115,000 shopping centers in the U.S. at the end of 2020 compared to 112 in 2010 and 90,000 in 2000. So that's basically shop malls, outlet malls, strip malls, Mall of America that's got a roller coaster in it. I guess that'd be like a destination mall. I don't know. But there were about 115,000 of those at the end of 2020. And so still up a little bit, but relatively flat versus where they were in 2010. And so, like I mentioned, UBS is expecting about another 80,000 to close over the next 5 years, which is about 9% of those total stores. Now, the assumption that they're using is they are assuming that e-commerce, right? So people purchasing online is going to continue to ramp up as a percentage of purchases. So think about all of the purchases as a pie of 100%. Their assumption is that 18% currently, which is e-commerce, would grow to about 27%. So in that scenario, it would grow, what is that, by about 50% versus where it is today. Now, is that true? I mean, we don't know, right? But the expectation there would be is that if that number comes in lower, that the number of store closures would be reduced, and if that number comes in higher, then the number of closures would be increased. And so for 2020 or for 2019, apologies. So for 2021, U.S. retailers have announced about 3,100 store closures, but about 3,500 store openings. And we'll talk a little bit about the store openings a little bit later in the show, but about 3,100 or so in 2021. And 2019, they actually tracked about 9,800. So think about it's probably about 3 times of what they are announcing for 2021. And then that figure actually fell in 2020 down to about 8,700. So the interesting part about this is why, right? Why are they anticipating lower store closures in 2020, but in 2021, but also they're anticipating more store openings than closures, which, in my opinion, I'm never going to look negatively down, and I'm sure most people don't, but in terms of businesses that are opening, right? Because even if it's a large corporate chain, that means people are going to be working. That means that value is being added to where people are expected to spend money and help increase production and help basically rise people out of whatever section or whatever bracket that they are in, right? So giving people who potentially don't have employment or people who do the next level up so that they can also provide better for their families. And so UBS is also forecasting that they anticipate that it's going to be mostly in clothing and accessories, which I don't think is that big of a surprise for people. And so that's going to be about 25% or so of the closures, and it's going to be a lot of them in malls. So my expectation, and they also throw office supplies and sporting goods in there as well. And my guess is, and I would have to dive into this a little bit more, or maybe one of you guys are also a little bit more familiar. My guess is because they take up a huge footprint, right? Most of the stores, think about like your Dick's Sporting Goods or your Academies or your Office Depots or Office Maxes, if those two even still exist. I think they merged a while back. But then, like we talked about before, your Macy's, your J.C. Penney's, your very large retail outlets that really take up a lot of space. So the expectation there is that those would be the primary area of store closures. Now, one of the things I also found is there was a list where the top 2021 companies that expected to close. Some of these were a surprise. Some of these were not really much of a surprise. Christopher and Banks, I guess it's a retail outlet. That's the number one. I'm not super familiar with them. I believe it's clothing. Family Video, which I feel really bad because when I read that Family Video was on there, it reminded me of whenever I was a kid. And we used to go down to the video store, and you get really pissed off because there was a new movie that you wanted to watch, but they only had 4 copies and they were all rented already. But going down to the video store was a very good experience, and so it was nice to see that a store like that still existed. But unfortunately, they're going to be closing a pretty significant amount. And the other ones were Starbucks, which I know people are going to be like, Starbucks? Why in the world would Starbucks actually close locations? Well, the part of it is because what they're going to do is they're going to focus more on their drive-throughs, and they're going to focus more on curbside pickups and that kind of thing. So my guess here, my assumption is that the stores that they're looking to close are probably stores that have, similar to the other retailers, a large footprint, right? So think about you walk into a Starbucks, most of the time it's relatively small. They've got a few tables and lines. The ones that they're probably going to close are large. They're probably ones that have, high rents. They probably have high fixed costs, right? That are keeping those costs higher than they would want them to be, and they require more staff and that kind of thing. And so they're going to focus more, I think, on those smaller stores. And the other ones are Gap and then Godiva Chocolate, which Godiva Chocolate, I mean, I'm kind of surprised. I mean, I guess I shouldn't be because I know people like chocolate, but it always kind of amazes me that somebody's really able to kind of have an entire retail outlet that's kind of centered around one specific item. I know they have other things than just chocolates, but the fact that Godiva as a brand is like, you know what, we should have a retail store where people can go, man, I can't wait to go to the mall to buy some chocolate. Or maybe they don't think that anymore, and that's why they're closing them. But so those were the top 5. Again, clothing in there, a Family Video, which was kind of surprising, and then focus on smaller footprint locations, which again Starbucks is going to do, which shouldn't shock anybody. I'm sure if any of you that are listening or watching are fans of Chick-fil-A, right? Chick-fil-A had like the best year ever, in 2020. I mean, no one really performed better than Chick-fil-A as far as the lockdowns go. And part of it is because they're very efficient, right? Most of their locations have 2 drive-throughs. Not only do they have 2 drive-throughs, but they've got 4 or 5 of the nicest kids that you probably ever meet out there greeting you with a smile, and it's a well-oiled machine, and even though there's 40 cars in line, you're out in 10 minutes and your food's hot and it's great and everything like that. And so, Chick-fil-A is like, we could do this all day long. We don't necessarily need to have large retail space. And so, that's another example of a company who's kind of reducing down that footprint. But, and I've actually had some people message me and some people provide some feedback recently that I've just been kind of negative. I don't try to be negative. I try to be positive. I try to give people the information and help them learn and understand what is going on in the economy, what is going on from a financial standpoint, a dollar value, to what is going on in the business climate. Unfortunately, because of the climate that we're in right now, a lot of times it comes off as negative. But I don't necessarily mean it that way. But so one of the other things that came up, like I mentioned earlier, is that store openings in 2021 are actually forecasted to be higher than the store closures, which is good news. The drawback to it is why they're opening. And so unfortunately what ends up happening is that you have an outside factor, which is the lockdowns, that have kind of helped usher in an era of winners and losers when it comes to businesses. So again, talking about the 5 that we talked about earlier, Christopher and Banks, Family Video, your Macy's, your J.C. Penney's. Not to say that they would not have struggled either way, just in a scenario where the pandemic has kind of exacerbated that, right? It's kind of made that even more apparent and a little bit worse. But some good news though to go along with that. For example, Coresight actually had predicted last year that they were going to expect like 25,000 closures in 2020, which was a massive number. But again, like we mentioned before, that number only ended up being 8,700. And then, last year there was about 3,300 openings. So significantly less than what was originally forecasted, which is great. I happen to know a business owner who did fortunately be able to take advantage of the PPP loan. He was able to float payroll for a couple of months, and it really worked out for him. And I'm sure there are quite a few other businesses that were in similar situations. Doesn't mean I agree with the PPP. That is not the point, because I definitely do not agree with the PPP, but I will say that there are definitely people who were able to take advantage of that and able to withstand really the worst part of the lockdowns, which was April and May of last year. But so that was a good one. And then also too, another advantage that we're seeing in 2021 is the vast array of companies who are actually very excited about opening up new locations. Which is great because again, right, like we talked about earlier, that's people going to work. That's people that are opening up businesses, that they're investing the capital necessary to make a business that they would anticipate that would provide enough value to be worth the capital investment, which is one of the big things that we talk about on the show, is being able to provide value to someone. So for example, you open up a business, I find the product that you are providing is more valuable than the money that's in my pocket, or the money that's not in my pocket, and so we have a voluntary exchange, and both of us end up coming out ahead. But some of the companies that are actually looking at it expanding, some of them kind of surprised me. Ulta Beauty, I mean, it's a beauty supply store, not super familiar. I mean, I have these beautiful features of mine are all natural. There's no makeup there, so I don't typically tend to wear any. But Ulta Beauty and Sephora, which is another makeup outlet, the Dick's Sporting Goods, Five Below, and TJ Maxx ones are kind of surprising. I'm not super familiar as far as Dick's go. Five Below and TJ Maxx kind of makes sense. It's a little bit more of like a discount retailer. My guess is that their payroll costs are probably a bit low than some of their counterparts. And then they could also open up a little bit smaller footprint stores compared to the ones that are closing. But part of the reason why too that they're doing this is decreased rents, and we'll get to that here in a little bit. But something that also goes along with it is shorter leases, right? So the advantage of having a shorter lease is it gives you the opportunity to decide whether or not you want to experiment, whether or not you want to open a business at a certain location. Say, for example, your typical retail contract lease term is 15 years. I know companies also sign them for as much as 30 years, right? You want to open up an experimental location that's testing a new concept. Maybe 30 years isn't the type of contract you want to sign. Why would you want to be somewhere for 30 years when 2 years from now the concept that you're trying out doesn't work out? But you have somebody who is saying, hey, I've got all this retail space that I need to fill. I'll help you sign a 3-year contract or a 5-year contract. Then you're having a little bit more incentivization, that's there. And the other thing, like we had just kind of talked about too, was the decreased rents. So for example, one of the quotes that was from Fabletics, the CEO of Fabletics, that says, there's more space available and we're able to get better terms than we were 2 years ago. As an example, New York City retail rents actually stumbled by like 25%, right? They were down 25% from 2019 and they are continuing to go down. Now, if you are a regular listener to the show, you probably have a bit of an idea on my feelings as far as New York City goes. I don't think that that decrease is typical for most cities. I think New York City has had one of the worst responses to lockdowns, to the pandemic, and as we have also mentioned on this show too, they intend to kind of tax their way out of it. A lot of the wealthy people that live there, they're going to increase taxes and that kind of thing. And so I think the last report was in 2020 something like $34 billion of income actually kind of left the city. Now, how much of that's going to go back, we'll just have to wait and find out. But I think New York City has other issues going on other than just some decreased retail space and rents. So my guess is not all of your cities are going to be down 25% as far as commercial. But one of the other things that I found that was super interesting about this was the type of businesses that are coming in. I know we mentioned Ulta and Sephora. One of the other ones that I had just talked about was Fabletics. Now, I have no idea what a Fabletics is. Again, you can't see them, but my legs are just beautiful the way they are. I don't typically tend to need to wear, yoga pants. Because I work out in my shorts and my legs look great and they're just fantastic just the way they are. So I had to look up what Fabletics is, and it's actually a very interesting concept. If you're not familiar with Fabletics, what it actually is it's similar to athletic wear for women. So think, tank tops, yoga pants or leggings or whatever you'd like to call them. But one of the things that they also do is they also offer fitness classes. So it kind of combines like an open gym concept where they have fitness classes along with clothing. And I believe most of the actual classes that they offer are free, which to me, the concept is great, right? It's a very innovative way of being able to offer value to people who aren't necessarily just looking for clothes, but they want something to go along with it. And so when I was reading about this, I thought that was very fascinating, because one of the other things too, and one of the major reasons why a lot of these large retail outlets are closing up shop is due to increased payroll costs, right? As we go into an era where this random number of $15 of minimum wage continues to come up in terms of discussion, which if you haven't listened to my episode on the minimum wage, you should go back and listen to it. But what these stores are doing is that they're able to offer additional value. The people that work there aren't necessarily just selling clothes, but they're also able to teach some fitness classes. So you're kind of double dipping as far as the opportunity at stores like Fabletics. One of the other things that I thought was super cool is I guess Toys R Us is also looking at opening up some new locations, which I find to be pretty fascinating. I knew that they had declared bankruptcy, but it's good to see that they're coming back. My guess is it won't be the Toys R Us of my childhood where you walk in and it's just wall to wall of a massive warehouse of toys everywhere and you just want to play with everything. My guess is it'll probably be a condensed version of that. Think smaller footprint, lower rents, lower costs, that kind of thing. But it's great to see that a place like Toys R Us is able to kind of rebound. One of the other things too that I thought was super interesting is there's also going to be a rise in other additional testing concepts, and one of them is actually called dark stores. And so not only are they going to be reduced footprint stores, but they're also going to be called dark stores that are essentially just hubs for online orders. So that to me is super interesting, especially reading about it now. Several weeks ago, I had the pleasure to have a conversation at the Verizon store with a gentleman who was the assistant manager at a footwear store here, and it was located in the mall. And we just got to talking, and I had mentioned it to him that I had basically been working from home for a year from now, or a year, as they're trying to figure out what to do as far as the lockdowns and stuff like that go. And he had mentioned that his store was basically closed for about 2.5 months, I think. As most people would have expected, it was basically at the end of March, April and May before they kind of started coming back in. But one of the things that he had mentioned that I found very fascinating was him and his manager, he said that they basically did more work in those 2.5 months, than they had the entire time before that. And the reason for it was they were sitting there and they were filling online orders. And so it was just him and his manager. So think about the other people who would work there. So people would come in, they want to try on shoes. These people, they go to the back, they're pulling shoes, then they're having to put them back on the shelves, or they're having to put them back in the warehouse, that kind of thing. They didn't have to do any of that because it was all purchased online. So this shoe store, who probably normally had 20 to 30 people on the payroll, they basically had two, and these two people were filling these online orders. And so it's kind of a concept that I came across of a dark store before I really kind of knew what a dark store was. And so that's going to be very interesting to see how that kind of plays out, especially with stuff that you don't necessarily have to try on. So in that scenario, you had the shoe store. You already know what your size is. You can see whether or not that you like them online, and then you just go ahead and order them, and then you can go to the store and you can pick them up, or they can have them delivered, or that kind of thing. And so I think we will tend to see a little bit more of that. But one of the other things that I thought was very interesting whenever I was talking with the guy is that he also mentioned that their 2021 sales, especially as far as the year goes, are absolutely blowing away. I mean, they were obviously going to blow away 2020 because, this time of the year with the lockdowns and everything like that. But they were blowing away 2019. And what he had mentioned is that they were still continuing to do tons of online orders, but people were also coming into the store as well. So not only were they getting a lot of foot traffic back, they were still getting that online traffic as well. And so then that got me thinking, well, are there other businesses not just doing that, that also have kind of dark store concepts? And one of them came up as restaurants. And so I actually found another article that was talking about additional businesses from a Yelp report. So Yelp had seen from March 2020 to March 2021 about 500,000 new business listings on their platform. Now, that is not to say that was 500,000 businesses that opened during that time. It's just about 500,000 that are now listed on Yelp's platform. But a couple of the things that really stood out to me that I made a note of was that food trucks climbed 12%, which again, I did an episode on that a while back as far as restaurants and things like that go. So that's definitely worth going back as well. But food trucks are up about 12%, and food delivery businesses are up 128%. Now, we have talked about in the past restaurants, the types of overhead costs that you have operating a full service restaurant, the types of margins that you typically tend to have in a full service restaurant versus a casual, a fast casual restaurant or a food truck, those kinds of things. And so what you're seeing is really what we talked about before coming to fruition, right? Where you're seeing eateries and you're seeing restaurants that are opening up, but they're not opening up the same way that they had before all of the lockdowns, right? You're not seeing a massive amount of openings of full service restaurants. You're seeing the business model change as far as how these restaurants are going to operate. So I thought the 128% of the food delivery businesses was pretty interesting. Now, if you have also been paying attention, that also means that they could have gone from 7 to 15, right? So just because it goes up 128% doesn't mean that there's a ton of them, but just that the growth of them is there. And when I was reading about some of this too, another company that popped up was Chipotle. So Chipotle, again, as we talked about prior, Chipotle is actually one of those companies, because they have the capital, because they have the name recognition and the power, they actually were growing their footprint over the time period of the lockdowns versus a lot of other companies who unfortunately were having to shutter their doors. But they're also testing out a new concept, and it's going to be a digital only, right? So it's a digital online store only. So if you think about some of your local restaurants. It could be, I've seen it done for some Asian restaurants as well as some Hispanic restaurants, where you basically kind of walk in and there's a counter, right? They might have one or two tables or something along those lines, but it's not going to have a large dine-in area. So this one is basically going to be a dark store, but for Chipotle. So you order it through the app, whatever it is, you go into the store and it's kind of sitting there in the corner with your name on it, and you can kind of pick up your lunch and go. And so it's really showing the shift in the types of businesses in these industries that these lockdowns have really kind of created and allowed people to kind of somewhat innovate. But again, a lot of it is due to forced market changes. Another example, I have a friend who happens to manage over several fast casual restaurant chains. And one of the things similar to the shoe store is that the sales have continued to be super high, and a lot of it is due to not only the online orders, but again, they are also starting to get the foot traffic back. So it's not necessarily just specific types, but of businesses and industries, but we are happening to see that type of growth and that escalation across multiple industries. So it's a very interesting time to really analyze and look at the business landscape and think about where it's going to be 5 or 10 years from now. Personally, one of the things that I've thought that I think would be super great as far as retail is you have a platform that somebody can go in and they can try on a blank, maybe it's green, right? A green outfit, and they use it as the green screen. And then you have a screen up where they can see themselves and how they look in it. And then you can change all the settings and whatever else, get the measurements and everything. And then you just have that dress or those pants or that shirt or whatever shipped to that person's house. Because you can get away with something like that with a store that's the size of somebody's living room, right? Because all you really need is the technology to be able to try on something and be able to look into what would essentially be a mirror and see how it would look on you. And then they have all of your measurements and you can go home. And so you don't necessarily need 20, 30 people there showing people around different clothes, folding, all that kind of stuff, because the actual inventory that you keep is very low. So it's going to be a very interesting time, but I wanted to bring some positivity, to the show today, because that's what it's about, right? It's about staying positive, and it's about looking at the future in a positive light, and seeing and hearing stories about how people are able to innovate and how people are able to improve their current condition, as all of you should always be doing, because again, as we like to say on the show, right, is that you have an obligation to be as financially successful as possible. And so if it means coming up with a different type of concept or opening up your own food truck, whatever that might be, that is your obligation as a member of this community, to do it, to be successful, and then help spread that prosperity amongst each other. So that's the show for today. I had a lot of fun reading about some positive stories and really seeing about how some companies are able to innovate, and how they're really kind of coming out of what will hopefully be the end of this pandemic, and really kind of help turn the business environment around, and some companies to be on the lookout for. So I hope you have a great rest of the day. If you enjoy the show, like I always say, share it with a friend. Share it wherever you'd like to. Like, subscribe on YouTube, all that kind of good stuff. And if you have any feedback or any questions, don't ever hesitate to reach out to me on any or all those platforms. But all right, well, we will talk to you again next time. Bye.